Dating in this generation sucks, but what are we comparing it to? I'm Josh Arthur, and this is a crash course of the history of dating in America. Dating as we know it has only existed for about 160 years. That means that dating is younger than slavery. Let that sink in for a second. Prior to the 1850s and 60s, most people got together through arranged marriages. Parents put people together for the purpose of creating a marriage that would protect income, property, and land, and then pass it down to generations. So this was a primary consideration when selecting a mate for their child. Around the 1850s and 60s, the idea that romantic love should be the cornerstone of marriage spread throughout the country, and these kids who had previously been set up by mom and dad wanted to have some input into who they'd spend the rest of their life with. This is the beginning of dating as we know it, and it started with something called supervised visits. In the 1850s and 60s, people got to know each other through supervised visits. The man would come to the woman's house and interact with her under the watchful eye of mom and dad. They talk, they play games, they dance, they do fun stuff, but no hanky-panky unless the parents were cool with it, which sometimes they were. If you were the type that came around consistently and the parents approved of your relationship, they would do things like let the two of you lie in a bed separated by a board or sew you into a knapsack. By the 1870s, the invention of the telephone added an interesting wrinkle to this system. Gentlemen callers, as they became known, would come by the house and leave a card with the parents. This would then be passed to the daughter, and she would be able to call who she approved of to come and spend time with her. Supervised visits were pretty much the same, but the advent of the telephone meant that there were more gentlemen callers than there would have been before it existed. By this point, there was no expectation of who pays for dates because there was nothing to pay for. This system continued pretty much until the 1920s when a couple of things happened. Kids wanted to have more autonomy in the date selection process and didn't really approve of the supervised visits. Right around this time, the invention of the automobile made this type of freedom possible. At this point, the courting system moved outside of the house, and people, usually wealthy, with automobiles would go and date outside. Now, they still didn't do a whole lot of events, maybe a cinema or something like that, but mostly it was the courting system just in a car. So they would park and talk and do other things that people do in parked cars. You know what I'm talking about. This pretty much continued until the 1930s when the widespread of the automobile made dating something that was more social than it was seeking a mate. Dating was like going to the movies or spending time with friends. It's something that you did for fun. It wasn't really about finding a soulmate. So it wasn't uncommon for people to date 4 or 5 people in a week, or maybe 2 on the same day. The biggest factor that determined whether a girl would be asked out was whether or not she was fun to be around and whether or not she would make an evening enjoyable. How did guys know this? Because they already knew the girl before they asked her out, or they knew somebody that knew her, or they knew somebody that knew somebody that knew her. In the 1930s, community-based dating was still a thing, and this determined who got asked out for a social evening. By the 1940s, this practice was still in place, but on steroids. Instead of being a social activity, dating was a sign of social status. Just like a man's car or his clothes or his job, being able to take the most popular woman out was a sign that he was socially viable. The same went for women. As a social signifier, a woman had importance or prestige based off of how many men took her out. This is also where the practice of bringing gifts and scheduling dates and the expectation that men should pay for dates came from. It would be unbecoming of a woman to accept the date at the last minute because that meant that she wasn't as socially valuable as she wanted to be. Additionally, the dating industry arose. Articles in newspapers and magazines taught girls and guys how to get more dates. It was about going out and being seen. If you weren't seen, then you didn't get the social status. Again, it wasn't common for people to have 4 and 5 dates in a week, or even 2 or 3 in the exact same day. The thing that determined whether a girl would get asked out or not is how popular she was. How much social status could a guy get by being seen with her? This persisted until the 1950s when something changed. Because of the world wars that the country was involved in, there was a shortage of men. Instead of magazines and newspapers talking about how to get more dates, they spread the message that there might not be enough men to go around and millions of women might be single until they were beyond the age of marrying. Thus, a new trend emerged. Women insisted that guys go steady with them and give them a token of their commitment. Instead of people dating multiple people in a week, guys exchanged jackets or rings or necklaces and a promise that I'm only going to be with you. Going steady persisted and spread to younger and younger demographics. Eventually, high school and secondary school were also going steady. This persisted until the 1970s when hippie culture and rock and roll changed the nation. Assisted by media, they desensitized the nation to the message of free love and premarital sex. Dating also loosened up again because instead of dying in wars, more men were staying at home protesting them. For the first time in American culture, sex was a driving characteristic on whether or not you wanted to date somebody or not. This style of dating persisted through the 80s and 90s, and with each advent of technology, dating moved further and further away from the community-based model. Instead of dating somebody that you knew or somebody that you knew somebody that knew, you increasingly were more likely to date somebody that you didn't know anything about and that you had to get to know through the dating process. By 1995, Match.com launched as the first online dating site. And in 1998, You've Got Mail broadcasted online dating into the world by featuring the first couple that met online. Today, online dating is common and we're in a global society. The person living next door to you might have completely different national perspectives and ideologies and expectations than you have. This means that we are essentially in a no-hold-bars, anything-goes dating society. The only rules that really matter are the rules that you set for yourself. Still think this era of dating sucks? Let me know in the comments which era and dating style suits you the best. That's it for me, guys. See you next time.